God take this country away from the earth? What are the consequences for America? Number one, when God was talking to Israel about his blessings, he said, "For the Lord thy God blesseth thee as he promised thee, and thou shalt lend unto many nations, but thou shalt not borrow. For thou shalt reign over many nations, but they shall not reign over thee." So a sign of God's blessing to Israel was that they would lend and not borrow. Well, if you look at where we were, World War II, 1963, we threw God out. 1973, we legalized the shedding of innocent blood. During this time period, we started all of the great, quote, entitlement programs. We substituted government entitlement programs in place of the blessings of God after we threw him out and began shedding the blood of his image. Those entitlement programs have escalated exponentially, and these are inflation-adjusted numbers. These have been knocked down for inflation. They're up to now $3.3 trillion a year for education, Social Security, unemployment, other health care, Medicare, Medicaid. And just for fun, I put net interest on the federal debt on top here so you could see what it is. The interest on the federal debt is more than we spend at the federal level on Medicaid in every year. And it's growing rapidly. So we have this massive increase of social programs. Maybe you like these programs, maybe you don't. But the bottom line is we never had the money to pay for any of it. We just kept borrowing and borrowing and borrowing and borrowing. Now here, this line seems pretty flat because these are inflation-adjusted numbers, and we had double-digit inflation in this era right here, which held the numbers down. In reality, that curve is a little smoother, but it has shot up since 1987 to now $18.2 trillion in debt. Loans that we have taken out from a number of sources, not the least of which is China, who owns 23% of our public debt. If you look at actual dollar bills, not inflation-adjusted dollars, that's $19.7 trillion. Just the loans. Now, we have many other obligations beyond the actual loans. If you take all of our obligations and put them together, the $19.7 trillion of loans, plus, if you take the value today of the Medicare, Social Security, and other federal obligations at current benefit rates, that's another $48.7 trillion. Plus, we have 50 states. Every state has pension, health care, and other post-retirement benefits. In today's value, that's another $14 trillion. Then we've got the cost of all our 50 to 100-year-old roads, bridges, levees, and dams that are falling down, like the levees that collapsed in New Orleans, the bridge that collapsed in Minnesota. If you've ever driven on the Bronx-Queens Expressway in New York, let me tell you, it's an experience. It's bumper-to-bumper traffic 24 hours a day, and it goes like this when you drive on it. I mean, someday it's coming down, and I don't want to be on it when that happens. These have to be fixed. The American Society of Civil Engineers says that's another $1.6 trillion. Then the bailout costs. Now, we did get back some of the money. AIG and some banks have paid back their money. So deduct a little bit from that $8.5 trillion. And now we have the new health care reform, net of program cuts, which are not likely going to be realized, which we'll see. That's another $0.5 trillion. So we actually have $93 trillion in obligations. Just these few listed obligations. $93 trillion that we are leaving to our children to pay off when we can't pay it off. But remember, we're dropping from 7 workers per retiree down to 3. And actually, I've seen some statistics from Medicare that say we actually had 8 workers per retiree when Medicare was founded, and we're dropping down to 2 workers per retiree. That means they will have less than 1/4 of the collective earning power to pay these debts than we have, and we cannot pay them. Now, if you go to a bank and you ask for a loan, they'll ask you 2 questions. One, what are you worth, and how much do you make? Right? What are we worth? If you take the entire household net worth of America, including Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, the entire net worth, a household net worth is $41 trillion. How much do we owe? $93 trillion. That means if we were to consume the entire wealth of the country, everyone, it would not pay even half of these obligations. Not half. How much do you make? Well, let's put this on a household level. If you take the $93 trillion and divide it over our 117 million households, that's nearly $800,000 per household. You have an $800,000 mortgage that you didn't know about left to you by 35 years of your governmental leaders. Okay? Now, what's the median household income? $50,000. Now, if you take out a mortgage, you buy a house, you might buy a house that's 2 times your income, maybe 2.5 if you get a good interest rate. This is 16 times our income. That means it would take a 100% combined federal and state income tax for the next 16 years to pay these obligations. There's a minor problem with that. If you tax 100% of my money, I'd die of starvation in 2 weeks. So you have no taxpayers left. So how about doing it the other way? 50% income tax for the next 32 years. But that's only to pay these listed obligations. No fire departments, no schools, no police, no criminal justice, no national defense, no farm subsidies. You want those services too? Add another 35%. We're looking at potentially 85% income taxes would be needed to live at the level we would hope to live for. You don't believe me? He's on the lunatic fringe. This can't all be true. I'd like you to know these numbers come from some of the top people in the world, people who know this better than anybody else. They come from highly reliable sources. The chief actuary of the Social Security Administration had a wonderful presentation where he showed how the declining population is causing the per capita cost to go up to an unsustainable level. And I asked him if since 1973 every family had had just one more baby, how would that have affected the numbers? And he said to me, oh, we've already run the numbers. Quote, we would not have this problem today. We've brought it on ourselves, folks. We have fallen from being the greatest lender nation in the world after World War II to being the greatest debtor nation in the history of the world. You will lend and not borrow was a sign of God's blessing. What was this turning point?